Listen to me carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will make your blood boil. My name is Bertha, I'm 26 years old, and 3 months ago my own parents stabbed me in the heart in front of 200 people at my sister's wedding. I was standing there in that goddamn bridesmaid dress, the one they insisted I wear despite knowing how much I hated the color pink, when my father grabbed the microphone during his toast. His face was flushed with champagne and arrogance, and he looked directly at me as he spoke these exact words. You know, we always wondered what we did wrong with our first daughter. She's sitting right there, Bertha, and she's never given us anything to be proud of. No husband, no career worth mentioning, still living paycheck to paycheck at 26. But thank God we got it right the second time with Gertrude. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 guests turned to stare at me like I was some circus freak. Then came the nervous laughter, that awful, pitying sound that people make when they witness someone being destroyed in public. Some guests looked embarrassed. Others whispered behind their hands. A few actually smiled, enjoying the spectacle of my humiliation. My mother, my own mother, raised her glass and nodded in agreement. To Gertrude, she said, our real success story. I felt every pair of eyes in that room burning into me. My face went crimson. My hands shook so violently I had to set down my champagne glass before I dropped it. The woman sitting next to me, some distant relative I barely knew, patted my shoulder with fake sympathy and whispered, "Oh honey, families can be so difficult." But this wasn't difficult. This was annihilation. My sister Gertrude stood there in her white dress, radiant and perfect, saying nothing, doing nothing, just letting our parents destroy me on what was supposed to be her special day. The golden child getting her golden moment while I got publicly executed. I want to know where you're listening from right now. Drop your country and time zone in the comments, because I need to know that someone, somewhere, understands what it feels like to be thrown away by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. The rest of that wedding was torture. Every conversation stopped when I approached. Every group of relatives suddenly found reasons to disperse when I walked by. I caught fragments of whispered conversations, always knew she was the disappointment, poor thing, never could measure up. Gertrude was always the special one. I left before the cake was cut. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. The drive home was a blur of tears and rage. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, screaming at the empty car until my throat was raw. When I finally made it to my apartment, that tiny, cramped space my parents loved to mock, I collapsed on my couch and sobbed until there was nothing left inside me. But that was just the beginning of my nightmare. The next morning, my phone started buzzing. Text after text from people who'd been at the wedding. Some tried to be supportive. I can't believe they said that, you don't deserve that treatment. But most were just fishing for gossip, wanting details about our family drama they could spread around town. Mrs. Henderson from next door knocked on my apartment door with a casserole and that fake concerned expression people wear when they smell blood in the water. "Oh Bertha, honey, I heard about what happened at the wedding. How are you holding up?" But I could see it in her eyes. The pity, the superiority, the relief that it wasn't her family being torn apart in public. She wanted to comfort me just enough to feel good about herself, then go home and tell her husband every juicy detail. "I'm fine," I lied, taking the casserole I didn't want from a woman I couldn't stand. "Well, if you need anything," she said, already backing away from my door. Families can be so complicated. Complicated. That word again. As if what my parents did was some minor disagreement instead of character assassination. The worst part was going to work on Monday. I'm a medical assistant at a small clinic downtown, and gossip travels fast in our little town. I could feel the stares, hear the whispers stopping abruptly when I walked into a room. Dr. Morrison, my boss, called me into his office with that uncomfortable look men get when they have to deal with women's emotions. "Bertha, I heard there was some family drama over the weekend. Are you going to be able to focus on your work?" Family drama. As if my parents hadn't just announced to the entire town that I was a worthless failure. as if they hadn't made it clear that I was the family mistake, the daughter they wished they'd never had. "I'll be fine," I said again, because what else could I say? That I was falling apart? That every night I lay in bed replaying those words over and over until they felt like acid eating through my chest? The nights were the worst. I'd lie there in my cold, empty bed, staring at the ceiling while my father's voice echoed in my head. We always wondered what we did wrong with our first daughter. The way he said it with such casual cruelty, like I was a failed experiment they'd finally given up on. I could hear my neighbors through the thin walls, the Johnsons arguing about money, their baby crying at 3 in the morning. Normal family problems. Not whatever twisted hell I'd been born into. I started avoiding places where I might run into people from the wedding. The grocery store where my mother shops. The coffee shop where my father meets his golf buddies. The library where Gertrude used to volunteer before she got married and moved to her perfect house in the suburbs. But hiding only made it worse. Every time I stayed home, I felt like I was proving them right. That I really was the disappointment they claimed I was. The daughter who couldn't handle criticism. The weak one who fell apart when faced with the truth. 3 weeks passed like this. 3 weeks of shame and isolation and self-doubt that felt like drowning in slow motion. I started wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I really was a failure. Maybe I really had never given them anything to be proud of. Then my phone rang. I was sitting on my couch in my pajamas at 2 in the afternoon, eating cereal for lunch and watching mindless television, when an unknown number flashed on my screen. I almost didn't answer. I was so tired of pitying calls and gossip-hungry relatives that I'd started ignoring most of my phone. But something made me pick up. "Is this Bertha Mitchell?" The voice was professional, crisp. A man I didn't recognize. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is David Brennan from Brennan, Walsh and Associates. I'm calling about your grandmother's estate." I sat up straighter. My grandmother, my father's mother, had died 6 months ago. We'd all gone to the funeral, but I hadn't heard anything about her will since then. I assumed everything had gone to my parents, as it usually does. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I think there might be some mistake. My parents are handling my grandmother's estate." There was a pause. Then Mr. Brennan said something that changed everything. "Actually, Miss Mitchell, you're the primary beneficiary of your grandmother's will. She left everything to you. The house, the business, all of her assets. I've been trying to reach you for weeks, but the contact information we had was outdated." The phone slipped in my suddenly sweaty hand. "That's impossible. My parents never said anything about." "Your parents don't know yet," he interrupted. "According to your grandmother's instructions, you were to be contacted first and given the choice of how to proceed. She was very specific about that." I felt the room spinning around me. My grandmother's house, the beautiful Victorian she'd lived in for 50 years. Her antique business that she'd built from nothing. The woman who'd always treated me with more kindness than my own parents had managed in 26 years. "How much?" I whispered. "The total estate is valued at approximately $1.2 million. Plus the business, which has been quite profitable. Your grandmother was a very savvy investor, Miss Mitchell. $1.2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. I who couldn't afford to move out of my cramped apartment. I who worked 40 hours a week just to scrape by. I who my parents had just announced was their greatest disappointment. I was rich. Miss Mitchell? Are you still there?" "Yes, I managed." "Yes, I'm here." "What happens now?" "We need to meet to discuss the details and transfer everything into your name. But Miss Mitchell, there's something else you should know. Your grandmother left a letter for you. Would you like me to read it now, or would you prefer to wait until our meeting?" "Read it now." My voice sounded strange, distant. I heard papers rustling, then Mr. Brennan cleared his throat. "My dearest Bertha, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone and you're finally learning the truth about your inheritance. I've watched your parents treat you terribly for years, and I've seen how they favor Gertrude over you in every way. I never said anything because I'm old and tired and frankly, I was a coward. But I can make it right now. Everything I have is yours because you're the granddaughter who visited me every Sunday, who helped me with my garden, who listened to my stories about your grandfather. You're the one who saw me as a person, not just a source of future inheritance. Your parents don't know about this will, and neither does Gertrude. That's intentional. Use this gift however you see fit, but please don't let them walk all over you anymore. You're worth so much more than they've ever given you credit for. Love, Grandma Rose. I was crying before he finished reading. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. Pure, white-hot fury at my parents who had humiliated me at Gertrude's wedding while knowing nothing about what was coming. At my sister who had stood by and watched me get destroyed. At every person in that reception hall who had looked at me with pity and assumed they knew my worth. When can we meet? I asked, and my voice was steady as steel. Tomorrow morning, if you're available. 10 o'clock at my office. I'll be there. I hung up and sat in the sudden silence of my apartment. Outside, I could hear life continuing. Cars driving by, children playing, the normal sounds of a world that had no idea everything had just changed. My parents thought they had won. They thought they had put me in my place once and for all. They had no idea that their despised daughter now controlled more money than they'd ever seen in their lives. The question that burned in my chest was simple. What do you do when the people who destroyed you suddenly need you more than you've ever needed them? Should I forgive them? Or should I let them suffer the way they made me suffer? Drop a comment and tell me what you would do. Because what happened next was going to test every ounce of strength I had left. The next 24 hours crawled by like torture. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything except the meeting with Mr. Brennan. Every few minutes, I found myself staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring. Waiting for my parents to call and apologize, or for Gertrude to reach out and acknowledge what had happened at her wedding. But the phone stayed silent. I showed up at Mr. Brennan's office 15 minutes early, wearing the only professional outfit I owned, a black dress I'd bought for job interviews that never led anywhere. The law office was everything mine wasn't: expensive, polished, successful. Exactly the kind of place my parents would expect to belong in. Mr. Brennan was a kind-faced man in his 60s who shook my hand with genuine warmth. For the next 2 hours, we went through paperwork that made my head spin. Property deeds, business documents, bank account transfers. All of it being signed over to me. Your grandmother was very thorough, he explained as I signed document after document. She updated this will 6 months before she passed, after your sister's engagement was announced. She specifically mentioned wanting to see how your family treated you at the wedding before making her final decision. The irony was so perfect it made me laugh out loud. A bitter, angry sound that echoed in the quiet office. She would have seen it if she'd lived long enough, I said. I think she knew what would happen, Mr. Brennan replied quietly. That's why she made sure you were protected. When we finished, I walked out of that office as the owner of a house, a business, and enough money to never worry about rent again. But more than that, I walked out with power. Real power over the people who had spent my entire life making me feel powerless. I drove straight to my grandmother's house, my house now, and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes just staring at it. The white Victorian with its wraparound porch and rose garden that Grandma Rose had tended for decades. It was beautiful and peaceful and mine. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. Her furniture, her photographs, her collection of vintage jewelry that was probably worth more than I'd made in the last 5 years combined. But what struck me most was how quiet it was. How free from judgment and criticism and the constant weight of disappointing people. I was sitting in her kitchen, drinking tea from her china cups, when my phone finally rang. Bertha? My mother's voice was sharp with irritation. Where have you been? I've been calling you for hours. Interesting. She hadn't called me once since the wedding 3 weeks ago. Now suddenly she needed to reach me urgently. I've been busy, I said calmly. Well, we need to talk. About your grandmother's estate. There seems to have been some sort of mistake with the lawyer. My heart started racing, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of mistake? He's claiming that she left everything to you, which is obviously impossible. Your father and I are handling the estate. We've been handling it for months. Actually, I said, there's no mistake. She did leave everything to me. The silence that followed was delicious. That's ridiculous, my mother finally sputtered. You're barely scraping by. What would you do with a house and a business? Be practical, Bertha. Sign everything over to us, and we'll make sure you get a small allowance from the proceeds. A small allowance? From my own inheritance. Like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with money. No, I said simply. No? What do you mean no? I mean no, I'm not signing anything over to you. Grandma Rose left everything to me for a reason. This is absurd. You can't possibly manage. I hung up. The phone started ringing again immediately. I turned it off. For the first time in 3 weeks, I felt something other than pain and humiliation. I felt power. Over the next few days, my phone exploded with messages. Voicemails from my father that started out authoritative and grew increasingly desperate. Texts from my mother that went from commanding to pleading. Even a few messages from Gertrude, suddenly remembering that she had a sister. I ignored them all. My friend Janet, one of the few people who genuinely tried to support me after the wedding, came by the antique shop where I was learning to run my new business. Bertha, what's going on? Your parents called me looking for you. They seem really upset. Good, I said, polishing a silver tea set that was probably worth more than my parents' car. Janet raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound like you. Maybe the old me, I said. But the old me let people walk all over her. The old me believed that she deserved to be treated like garbage. The old me is gone. So, what's the new planning to do? I looked at her across the shop that was now mine, in the town where everyone had witnessed my humiliation, and smiled. The new me is going to let them come to me. And that's exactly what happened. 2 weeks of silence from me, and my father left a voicemail that was so different from his usual commanding tone it was almost unrecognizable. Bertha, honey, please call us back. We just want to talk. We're sorry about what happened at the wedding. We were stressed, we'd been drinking, we didn't mean what we said. Please, sweetheart, just call us back so we can work this out as a family. Sweetheart. He called me sweetheart. The man who'd announced to 200 people that I was his greatest disappointment was suddenly calling me sweetheart. I saved the voicemail. Then I ignored it just like all the others. The silence became my weapon. Every day I didn't call them back, their panic grew. Every day I went to work at my successful business and came home to my beautiful house, their desperation increased. They'd thought they had power over me. They'd thought they could humiliate me, and I'd just take it because I always had before. They were learning that people can change. My lawyer friend Marcus, Mr. Brennan had referred me to him for ongoing legal advice, was impressed by my restraint. Most people in your situation would have called them back by now, he said over coffee. Either to gloat or to try to reconcile. But you're playing this perfectly. Let them sweat. Let them wonder. Silence is the most powerful response to people who are used to controlling the conversation. I'm not playing anything, I told him. I'm just done pretending that their approval matters to me. Even better, he said. Authenticity is more powerful than strategy. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of them having no idea whether I was going to forgive them or destroy them. 3 weeks of my father calling in favors around town, trying to find out what I was planning. 3 weeks of my mother pumping my old coworkers for information about my state of mind. Then the invitation came. It was hand-delivered to the antique shop by my cousin David, looking uncomfortable in his role as messenger. Bertha, your parents asked me to give you this. He handed me an elegant envelope with my name written in my mother's careful handwriting. They really want to see you. I opened it in front of him. Inside was an invitation to family dinner at their house the following Sunday. The same house where I'd grown up feeling like a stranger. Where every meal had been a performance of how much more successful and loved Gertrude was than me. Tell them I'll be there, I said. David looked relieved. Great. I think they just want to clear the air, you know? Family is family. Yes, I said, thinking of Grandma Rose and the letter she'd left me. Family is family. Sunday arrived gray and cold, which felt appropriate. I spent an hour getting ready, choosing my outfit carefully. Not the expensive clothes I could afford now, but something that would remind them exactly who they thought they were dealing with. I wanted them to see the daughter they'd dismissed and rejected. I wanted them to remember their own words. I pulled into their driveway at exactly 6 o'clock. The house looked the same as always, suburban perfection with its manicured lawn and expensive cars. The house where I'd learned that love was conditional and approval had to be earned. I sat in my car for a moment, remembering all the times I'd walked through that front door hoping this would be the day they'd finally see my worth. The day they'd finally tell me they were proud of me. The day they'd love me the way they loved Gertrude. That day was never coming, but I was done waiting for it. I walked up to the front door and rang the bell instead of using my key. I wasn't family anymore. I was a guest. My father answered, and his face was a masterpiece of fake warmth and barely concealed anxiety. Bertha. Sweetheart, come in, come in. We've missed you so much. The house smelled like my mother's cooking, pot roast and fresh bread, the same meal she'd made for every important family dinner of my childhood. Comfort food designed to make me feel safe and loved and willing to forgive. But I could see through it now. I could see the calculation behind the warm lighting and the carefully set table. I could see the script they'd rehearsed, the performance they'd planned to win me back. My mother appeared from the kitchen, her smile bright and desperate. "Oh, Bertha, you look wonderful." "Doesn't she look wonderful, Harold?" My father nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. You look like you've been taking care of yourself." They were both trying so hard to be warm and loving that it was almost pathetic. Almost. "Where's Gertrude?" I asked. "She couldn't make it tonight," my mother said quickly. "It's just us. Just family. Just the three of us. The parents who'd destroyed me and the daughter they'd decided to salvage." How convenient that Gertrude wasn't here to witness their humiliation. We sat down to dinner, and for the first 20 minutes, they kept up their performance perfectly. They asked about my job, complimented my hair, told me amusing stories about their neighbors. They were charming and attentive and absolutely terrified. Finally, over dessert, my father cleared his throat and got to the point. "Bertha, we want you to know how sorry we are about what happened at the wedding. We were under a lot of stress with all the planning and the expenses, and we'd had too much to drink. We said things we didn't mean. We love you so much," my mother added quickly. "You're our daughter. Our firstborn. We would never want to hurt you." I set down my fork and looked at them both. Really looked at them. These people who'd shaped my entire self-image. Who'd convinced me I was worthless for 26 years. Who'd publicly humiliated me and then tried to pretend it was a misunderstanding. "Tell me," I said calmly, "what exactly didn't you mean?" They glanced at each other nervously. "All of it," my father said. "We didn't mean any of it." "So when you said you always wondered what you did wrong with me, that wasn't true?" "Of course not," my mother said. "We're proud of you. And when you said I'd never given you anything to be proud of, that was just the alcohol talking?" "Exactly," my father said. "We were being foolish." "And when you called Gertrude your real success story, you didn't mean that either?" The pause was telling. They'd rehearsed apologies for the cruel things they'd said about me, but they hadn't prepared to deny their praise of Gertrude. "We love both our daughters equally," my mother finally said. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud, and they both flinched. "You know what's interesting?" I said. 3 weeks ago, you thought it was perfectly acceptable to humiliate me in front of 200 people. You thought I was such a failure, such a disappointment, that I deserved to be publicly shamed at my own sister's wedding. But now that you need something from me, suddenly you love me. Suddenly you're proud of me. Suddenly I matter. "We always," my father started. "Don't." My voice cut through his words like a blade. "Don't you dare sit there and lie to my face. We both know why I'm here. We both know what this is about. The fake warmth drained from their faces. My mother's hands shook as she reached for her wine glass. My father's jaw tightened with the effort of maintaining his composure. "I don't know what you mean," he said stiffly. "Grandma Rose's inheritance. The $1.2 million. The house. The business. The life you thought I was too much of a failure to handle." My mother made a small, desperate sound. "Bertha, please, let's not talk about money. This is about family." "No," I said, standing up from the table. "This is about the fact that you spent my entire life making me believe I was worthless, and now you need me to save you from your own financial problems." The mask finally slipped. My father's face darkened with anger and frustration. "You ungrateful little," he caught himself, but it was too late. There it was. The real man underneath all the fake apologies and desperate charm. "Finish that sentence," I said quietly. "Please. Let's hear what you really think of your ungrateful little daughter." He deflated like a punctured balloon. My mother started crying, the manipulative tears she'd used to control me since childhood. "We're in trouble, Bertha," she whispered. "We're going to lose the house. Your father's business is failing. We thought the inheritance would save us, and when we found out it went to you instead. You decided to destroy me publicly and then beg for my help privately," I finished. "You thought you could humiliate me, and I'd still come running when you needed money, because I've always come running before." "Please," my father said, and his voice was broken. "We're your parents." "No," I said, heading for the door. "Parents protect their children. Parents build them up instead of tearing them down. Parents don't announce to the world that their daughter is a disappointment. You're just two people who gave birth to me and spent the next 26 years regretting it." I was almost to the door when my mother's voice stopped me. "If you walk out that door, you'll never be welcome in this family again." I turned back to look at her. This woman who'd carried me for 9 months and then spent 26 years making me wish she hadn't. "Good," I said. I was never welcome anyway. The drive home was the most peaceful 20 minutes of my life. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just the quiet satisfaction of finally standing up for myself. But the real justice was just beginning. Within a week, word had spread through our small town about my parents' financial troubles. The same gossip network that had gleefully shared the details of my wedding humiliation now had fresh meat to devour. Mrs. Henderson knocked on my door, my new door at my beautiful house, with another casserole and that hungry look gossips get when they smell a scandal. "Bertha, dear, I heard your parents are having some difficulties. Is there anything I can do to help?" "I wouldn't know," I said pleasantly. "We don't really talk anymore." Her eyes lit up. "Oh my. Well, I heard Harold's construction business is bankrupt. And they took out a second mortgage on the house last year. People are saying they might have to move to one of those senior apartment complexes." The same woman who'd pitted me a month ago was now savoring my parents' downfall. It was disgusting and perfect at the same time. "That's unfortunate," I said, taking her casserole with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Well, if you hear anything," she said hopefully, "I'll be sure to let you know." But I already knew everything I needed to know. My father's business had been struggling for years. That's why they'd been counting on the inheritance. They'd planned to use Grandma Rose's money to pay off their debts and maintain their lifestyle. Instead, their despised daughter now had enough money to buy and sell them 10 times over. The social collapse was swift and brutal. In a town where reputation is everything, my parents went from respected members of the community to objects of pity and mockery in a matter of weeks. The same people who'd witnessed my humiliation at the wedding were now watching theirs play out in slow motion. My father's golf buddies stopped inviting him to their weekly games. My mother's book club suddenly found reasons to meet without her. The couples they'd socialized with for decades began avoiding them at the grocery store and church. Gertrude, their precious golden child, stopped visiting. She was too busy protecting her own reputation with her new husband's wealthy family to associate with her suddenly poor parents. The daughter they'd favored and praised abandoned them the moment they became a liability. I heard about it all through the town gossip network, but I felt no satisfaction. No vindication. Just a kind of cold detachment, like watching strangers face the consequences of their own choices. My phone kept ringing with calls from relatives and family friends, all of them wanting to know if I was going to help my parents. If I was going to be the bigger person and rescue them from their financial ruin. I ignored every call. 3 months after our last dinner together, I got a call from Marcus, my lawyer. Bertha, your parents have filed a legal challenge to your grandmother's will. They're claiming she was mentally incompetent when she made it. I'd been expecting this. Desperate people do desperate things. How strong is their case? I asked. Non-existent. Your grandmother was evaluated by her doctor 2 weeks before she died. She was completely lucid and mentally sound. Plus, we have video testimony of her explaining her reasoning for the will. They're going to lose, and it's going to cost them the little money they have left. Good, I said. The court hearing was scheduled for the following month. For weeks, my parents' lawyer tried to get me to settle out of court, to agree to split the inheritance and avoid a public trial. They offered me half, then 60%, then 75%. They were hemorrhaging money on legal fees they couldn't afford, fighting a case they couldn't win. I refused every offer. The day of the hearing, I walked into that courtroom wearing a tailored black suit I'd bought with my grandmother's money. I looked successful, confident, unbroken. Everything my parents had tried to convince me I wasn't. My parents sat across the aisle with their lawyer, looking smaller and shabbier than I'd ever seen them. My father's hair had gone completely gray in the past few months. My mother had dark circles under her eyes and wore a dress I recognized from 5 years ago. Judge Elizabeth Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s who looked like she'd heard every sob story in the book, called the courtroom to order. My parents' lawyer presented their case with all the desperation of a man who knew he was going to lose. He claimed my grandmother had been confused in her final months, that she'd been unduly influenced by me, that the will didn't reflect her true intentions. Then Mr. Brennan played the video. Grandma Rose, sitting in her living room 6 weeks before she died, speaking directly to the camera in a voice that was clear and strong and absolutely lucid. I'm making this video to ensure there's no confusion about my intentions regarding my will. I am leaving everything to my granddaughter Bertha because she is the only member of my family who has shown me genuine love and respect. Her parents, my son Harold and his wife Margaret, have treated her terribly her entire life. They have favored her sister Gertrude in every way possible and made Bertha feel unwanted and unloved in her own family. I've watched this for years and said nothing, but I can make it right now. Bertha deserves to know that someone saw her worth, even if her own parents never did. She deserves to know that someone believed in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. This inheritance is not charity. It's recognition. It's justice. And it's long overdue. The silence in that courtroom was deafening. Judge Morrison looked at my parents with the kind of disgust usually reserved for criminals. Their lawyer was shuffling papers nervously, knowing his case had just been destroyed. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, Judge Morrison said, her voice ice cold, your mother's will is ironclad and her mental competency is beyond question. But more than that, this video makes it clear that she knew exactly what she was doing and why. Your challenge to this will is not only frivolous, it's morally reprehensible. You're trying to steal from your own daughter the inheritance your mother specifically left to her as protection from your mistreatment. My father tried to speak. Your Honor, if we could just... No, she cut him off. You've wasted this court's time and your daughter's time with a baseless legal challenge motivated by nothing but greed. The will stands as written. Everything goes to Bertha Mitchell. Furthermore, you will pay all court costs and legal fees associated with this frivolous lawsuit. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. I walked out of that courthouse as the legally confirmed owner of everything my grandmother had built. My parents walked out facing thousands of dollars in additional legal fees they couldn't afford to pay. Outside, My father tried one last desperate appeal. Bertha, please. We're your parents. We raised you. Doesn't that count for something? I stopped and looked at him. This man who'd once seemed so powerful and intimidating, who'd made me feel small and worthless for most of my life. Now he was just a broken old man begging for mercy from the daughter he'd never loved. You didn't raise me, I said quietly. You tolerated me. There's a difference. I walked away from them for the last time. That night, I sat in my grandmother's garden, my garden now, watching the sunset through the roses she'd planted decades ago. The same roses she'd taught me to tend when I was little, before I learned that love in my family was conditional and I'd never meet the conditions. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Heard about the court hearing. How are you feeling? I thought about that question for a long time. How was I feeling? Not happy exactly. Happiness would come later, when I'd had time to build a life free from their toxicity. Not satisfied, because satisfaction implies completion, and I was just beginning. I felt something else. Something I'd never felt before in my 26 years of life. I felt free. Free from the weight of their disappointment. Free from the constant effort to win love that was never going to be given. Free from believing that their assessment of my worth was the truth instead of just their opinion. The girl who'd stood in that pink bridesmaid dress and absorbed their cruelty was gone. In her place was a woman who owned property and ran a business and didn't need anyone's approval to know her own value. I typed back to Janet, I feel like myself for the first time in my life. And I meant it. 6 months later, I was walking through the downtown area of our little town when I saw them. My parents, coming out of the small apartment complex where people go when they can't afford houses anymore. They looked older, grayer, defeated. They saw me too. For a moment, we all stopped walking. The distance between us was maybe 20 feet, but it felt like miles. My mother raised her hand slightly as if she might wave. My father just stared with the hollow eyes of a man who'd lost everything and finally understood it was his own fault. I could have acknowledged them. Could have offered some small gesture of reconciliation. Could have been the bigger person everyone expected me to be. Instead, I walked past them as if they were strangers. Because that's what they were to me now. Strangers who happened to share my DNA. People I'd once desperately wanted to love me who'd taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, that being unwanted by the wrong people is actually a gift. I kept walking toward my car, toward my house, toward my life. Behind me, I heard my mother say my name once, softly, but I didn't turn around. The sun was shining through the trees, casting everything in golden light. I thought about Grandma Rose and how proud she'd be to see me now. I thought about the business I was growing, the house I was renovating, the future I was building on my own terms. Most of all, I thought about that girl in the pink dress who'd believed her parents when they told her she was worthless. Who'd spent years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. Who'd thought their rejection meant she was broken instead of understanding that they were the ones who were broken. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth, who'd learned that sometimes the people who hurt you most are just teaching you who you don't want to become. Being unwanted by them had set me free to want myself. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. So tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven them? Would you have shared the inheritance? Would you have been the bigger person? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Walked away from people who never deserved you in the first place and built a life that was entirely your own? If you can hear this story and not understand why I chose myself over the people who rejected me, then maybe you're not ready for the truth about family and love and what we owe to people who hurt us. But if you understand why I walked away, if you know what it feels like to be unwanted by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, then you know that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is refusing to save people from the consequences of their own cruelty. Sometimes the only way to find yourself is to lose everyone who never saw you clearly in the first place. And sometimes being alone is so much better than being with people who make you feel alone anyway.